Alright, so I'm going to start looking at the next board, J82 two-tone, but I think this time I'll make notes, I'll go through it, but I'll pause the video for most of it. I'm going to try to make this video shorter, where I just kind of summarize everything at the end. But this is the situation, button versus, or big blind versus button, 40 big blinds deep, just a single raised pot. Alright, pause it. Alright, fuck, takes a while, but I finished it. So, big blind versus button 40 big blinds deep. The button should c-bet 76.5% of the time to a 1/3 size and 9.4% of the time to a 2/3 size. And versus a check raise, they should re-raise 6.4% of the time. Call 65% of the time, basically fold 29% of the time versus a 1/3 pot check raise. It's rare versus a 2/3 pot check raise. Sorry, bother. Now, big blind versus a 1/3 pot, c-bet should check raise about 21.2% of the time, call 37.1% of the time, and fold 41.8% of the time. Versus a 2/3 pot, c-bet, the big blind should check raise 5.8% of the time, call 41.9% of the time, and fold 52.2%. So, like we've seen before, it's less check raising, more calling, or about the same calling, and more folding. So here, I just put them all together here. Let's alright, let's put it there. It's clear here, feel it close together. Most of the time, anyway, on to the notes. The big blind should check range to the button. The button should c-bet 86% of the time. The biggest 2/3 pot c-bets for the button are queens 40% of the time and kings 50% of the time. So the top over pairs. Also, ace jack offsuit c-bets about 2/3 pot 25% of the time, and ace jack suited c-bets 2/3 about 20% of the time. Ace 8 off c-bets 2/3 about 20% of the time, and ace 8 suited about 5% of the time. Most frequent bluffs for 2/3 pots, 2/3 pot, are randomly queen 5 suited with the backdoor flush draw about 35% of the time, and queen 5 suited with the flush draw about 20% of the time. King 10, king 9 offsuit with a diamond and spades combo bet 2/3 pot about 40% of the time, and other combos about 5 to 20% of the time. More so with spades. Most frequent imposition checks are 7-7, 6-6, the top under pairs to the second pair, second card of the flop. About 70% of the time, fives, pair 5, 6% of the time. And many hands mix strategies between 1/3, 2/3, and some checks. Big blind versus 1/3 pot c-bet, always check raise jack 8, 2 pairs, and 8 2 suited 2 pairs. Queen jack X, plus is always a check raise. Jack 10 offsuit check raise 98% of the time, and Jack 10 suited 95% of the time. Jack 9X check raise about 90% of the time. Jack 7 check raise about 40% of the time. Jack 6 to Jack 7 suited check raise about 45% of the time without backdoor flush draw, and about 70% of the time with. Jack 6 offsuit check raise about 25% of the time, slightly more, maybe 35% of the time without backdoor flush draw blockers, and least often with diamond backdoor flush draw blockers. Jack 5 suited check raise about 50% of the time with backdoor flush draw, and 25% of the time otherwise. Jack 4 suited check raise 25% of all combos evenly, and Jack 3 suited is a pure call. So we always want to have our best top pairs re-raise, seems like, and our worst top pairs go into our call range. So Jack 3 suited if you want to simplify it, or at least remember that. And everything between mixes some of the time, but usually like the best few combos of the top pairs, check raise, and in this situation just mostly Jack 3 suited is a pure call, but progressively more calls the worse the pickup gets, usually. Jack 5 off check raise just 5% of the time, and Jack 4 off a slither of the time. Ace 8 suited check raise about 20% of the time, and King 8 suited with the backdoor flush draw check raise 60% of the time, and call the rest. Queen 8 suited check raise about 30% of the time, and call the rest. 10 8 suited mostly call. King 8 to King Queen off. King 8 to Queen 8 offsuit. 10 8 to 9 8 offsuit. 8 7 offsuit. 8 6 offsuit. Mostly just call slithers of check raise for 8 7 off and 8 6 off. 8 7 suited check raise about 60% of the time with flush draw and call rest. 8 6 suited to 8 3 suited all call even with flush draws. Ace 2 suited always call, but Ace of spade 2x check raise about 40% of the time, and Ace of diamond 2x check raise about 5% of the time. Ace of spades 3 of diamonds and the Ace of spades 4 diamonds combo check raise 100% of the time with backdoor flush draw, not backdoor flush draw, and kicker to the backdoor flush draw blocker. It's the bluff off on diamonds. It's very it also just blocks a few of the buttons continues. So where is it? Ace of spades 3 offsuit other combos check raise 70% of the time, and Ace of spades 4x other combos check raise 40% of the time. Ace x 4 of spades starts to call about 60% of the time, except with the Ace of diamonds, which is just 10% of the time. So it folds more often with Ace of diamond blocker. In that situation. Ace 5 off with a spade becomes always a call, even when the 5 of spades is the spade. And the Ace of spades 5 of diamond combo check raise about 40% of the time. Ace of spades 5x other combos check raise about 20% of the time. Ace 5x with the 5 of spades back to flush of calls always, or 95% plus. Ace 6 off starts to check raise. Ace of spades 6 of diamonds 50% of the time. Another Ace of spades combos 20% of the time. Ace x 6 of spades calls 80% of the time, except the Ace of diamonds 6x 6 of spades combo barely calls, just 10% or less. Ace 7 off, all spade combos start to defend, and they all just call with no check raises. So something I found, the 7 is a bad blocker, and I think it has to do with the buttons, checking range, which we talked about. The top checks are a pair of 7s, and then there's also like 10 7 suited, 9 7 suited, which check often in A7X. Check off. So we don't want to block their checking reach. We want to block their. Yeah, I think maybe that's part of it. I don't really know. All combos of Ace 9 to Ace 10 off float. Ace 9 suited always floats, also even without a back to flush draw. And Ace 7 suited to Ace 3 suited call the raise with flush draw and back to flush draw. Ace 7 suited with back to flush draw or flush draw always calls. See that pattern with the 7x. Ace 6 suited flush draw check raise about 25% of the time and calls the rest. And all backed up flush draw calls. Ace 3 suited to Ace 5 suited with flush draw check raise about 75% of the time and calls the rest. And back to the flush draw always calls except the Ace of diamonds 3 of diamonds combo check raises about 7% of the time. All 2x continues. King 2 suited is a pure call. King 3 suited to King 7 suited. Spades check raise 95+% of the time. King 3 of diamonds. I think some 2x check raise. I didn't write it down yet. Some Jack 2 to 7 2 suited. It's kind of, suits continues. King suit pure call. Let's say 30% of the time on. King 3, the King 7 of spades checkers 95% of the time, plus King 3, diamond, diamond, back to flush checkers about 35% of the time and call 50% of the time. King 4, diamond, diamond checkers about 5% of the time and call 50% of the time. King 5, suited with the backdoor flush draw, calls about 70% of the time. King 6 with the backdoor flush draw, call about 90% of the time. King 7, diamond, with the backdoor flush draw, calls about 95% of the time. King 9, suited with the flush draw checkers about 25% of the time, call rest. King 9 suited with the backdoor flush draw checkers about 20% of the time, call rest. King 10 suited with the flush draw and backdoor flush draw mostly call, just check raise backdoor flush draw combo about 70% of the time, and spades always call. Oh. King 10 suited without backdoor flush draw check raise about 3% of the time and calls 25% of the time. King Queen off is a pure call all combos. King 10 off check raise 80% of the time with King of Diamonds, 10 of Spades combo and call rest. And check raise 70% of the time with the King of Spades, 10 of Diamond combos and call rest. Backdoor flush draw King of Spades or 10 of Spades combos check raise about 50% of the time. So it's one of the most frequent check raise bluffs. And with the King of Diamonds, 10 of Clubs or Heart combos, solvers check raise about 30% of the time and calls 7% of the time. King X, 10 of Diamonds check raise about 20% of the time and calls 30 to 50% of the time. All other combos, even King of Diamond 9X combos fold. King 7 to King 3 off mostly fold, just the King of Spades kicker Diamond combos check raise 95% of the time. It's gonna be King Spades, so I gotta write it up because S is suited. And the King of Spades, I'll kind of remember too. King of Spades 7X combos, check raise 45% of the time and call 50% of the time. The King of Spades 5 of clubs, King of Spades 6X without diamonds. Armilli just calls almost always. King of Spades 4X check raise about 25% of the time and calls 50% of the time. King of Spades 3X without diamond kicker check raise about 65% of the time and calls 50% of the time. All flush draws continue and are pretty mixed between check raise and calling. Queen 10 off with the spade check raise about 70% of the time. Queen with a diamond check raise here. With a diamond check raise about 35% of the time, and without a diamond about 20% of the time, and call all other combos. So all gut shots continue. Kind of knew that. Queen 9 off with the spade check raise about 70% of the time, and with the diamond about 40% of the time. And so gut shots continue, but maybe check raise about 1/3 to 2/3 of the time. Kind of. With the spade more often, with the diamond slightly more often. Queen 10 off with the spade, where are we? Queen 9 off with a spade check raise about 70% of the time, and with the Queen Diamonds 40% of the time. Queen Diamonds 10 of spades, and with 10 of diamonds 65% of the time. Other non-backdoor flush draw or backdoor flush draw blocker combos check raise 35% of the time. So gut shots. Our best gut shots one check raise about 2/3 of the time, and with the good kind of backdoor flush draw kind of blockers about 1/3 of the time. Is you can kind of remember and kind of randomize that. 10-9 suited with the open and flush draw, open and straight draw and flush draw check raise 92% of the time. Without the flush draw 25% of the time. And with backdoor flush draw about 5% of the time. So least often with the backdoor flush draw. 10 and off check raise 25% of the time. Most often with a diamond backdoor flush draw blocker. So it's kind of interesting. It doesn't check raise bluff with the backdoor flush draw, but just with the blocker, 10 diamonds blocker. I think it's partially because it blocks a lot of floats maybe not all. Yeah, we'll have to look at that. Let's just check that out. Say we do check raise. What did it float with, and what does the 10 of diamonds mean? Do they call king 10 suit? Oh yeah, okay. King 10 off. Almost always with the 10 of diamonds. So it blocks some combos. Where else do we see 10? So here it doesn't really matter that blocker. Here it doesn't matter floating all gut shots. That's really about it. I don't know. Alright. So 10-7 off to 9-7 off with the gut shot checkers about 40% of the time. Mostly with the 10 of spades, 7 diamonds combo, or 9 of spades, 7 diamond combo, and spades or diamonds in general. All at least 35% of the time checkers. Auto folds are 7-6 off and worst offsuit connectors, 9-6 off, 10-6 off, queen 3 to queen 7 off, king 3 to king 7 off without backdoor flush draw. Ace 3 off without backdoor flush, not flush draw, and most ace 4 off without spade. And the ace 5 to ace 7 off combos without spades. It's similar for suited hands without flush draws or backdoor flush draws. Just some queen high and king high backdoor flush draws continue, but queen high backdoor flush draws only 25 to 40% of the time. With the queen of diamonds, with queen 3 suited, queen 6 suited, backdoor flush draw, and queen 7 suited, backdoor flush draws a pure fold. I think 7x is a bad blocker since it blocks checks. I mean, bet folds a bit, but most also because a lot of 7x's is wins check bet for 6-7 but I already mentioned that. I think it's basically towards the end now. Alright. Big blind versus 2/3 pot c-bet continues with all 2x pairs still, but now mostly just check raise queen jack x almost always, and king jack x about 50% of the time, and jack 10 off about 80% of the time, and jack 10 suited about 60% of the time. Only without backdoor flush draw, which always calls. So a lot less check raising versus a 2/3 pot c-bet. A lot less. Queen 2 suited check raise about 35% of the time, only without backdoor flush draw, and calls rest. Queen 2 suited 2 pair check raise about 30% of the time. Ace 3 off, even with the backdoor flush draw, starting to fold 50% of the time. Ace 5, Ace 7 off, calls 80% of the time with nut backdoor flush draw. And Ace 6 off, still almost a pure fold. Ace 9 off, a pure call with Ace of spades, no backdoor flush draw, but 9 of spades combo still fold. So Ace X with like Ace of hearts, 9 of spades combo still fold. That backdoor flush draw is not worth much. The king 3 to king 7 off, king 9 off, pure folds, even with backdoor flush draws. Queen 3 to queen 7 off, pure folds, all flush draws still call. So it's kind of like getting a period there. All flush draws still call, only ace 9 with the diamonds, backdoor flush draw, king 10, diamonds backdoor flush draw, queen 9, queen 10, 10-7, which are gut shots. All call with the backdoor flush draw, the rest are combos. Fold. Versus check raise after c-betting 1/3. Button should be raised queens always, kings about 70% of the time, ace jack off 60% of the time, ace jack suited 25% of the time, 35% of the time without a backdoor flush draw, and 50% of the time with. Ace 8 suited we raise 70% of the time with nut flush draw, and 5% of other times calling the rest. 10-8 suited with the flush draw we raise 60% of the time, and 9-8 suited with the flush draw 40% of the time. Deuces with the bolt we raise 40% of the time, but jacks and 8s trips, so it's not bolt. All flush draws float, and king 7 diamonds backdoor flush draw calls. I didn't. Most combos of king 10x call, king queen always floats, all gut shots float. And actually king 3 suited, king 7 suited, the backdoor flush draws all float. Alright, so that's basically it. Now I'm going to look for some real-time examples. Managed to keep this video a lot shorter than my other videos, which is good. I think this way of doing it is the best. instead of recording me making the notes. I'll just try to read them as fast as possible. Alright, I'll load this up, give me a minute. Alright, still crushing, it's hard. A lot of this is just from the beginning of code, and when there's so many new players, it's not that high amount, but it's still pretty good. Double digits, I think. So big blind, here on big blind facing one razor, and the razor position is the button. So that's good there. And board texture filters, just for flop. High card is a jack. Second high card is between 2 and, let's see, oh, we're going with the high card. 4 and, no, second high card, let's just say it's the last high card doesn't really matter. Let's say, but still, I have so many hands I should be able to find enough like this. Pre-flop. Let's see, facing c-bet, facing flop continuation bet equals 2. So this looks pretty good. Filter for that. That seems like way too many hands. Yeah, I didn't. I have to change it. I put and for everything. I mean or. There's or for everything, so it's gonna be and. There we go. It should reduce it. This makes sense. This is the exact order we were just looking at. Okay. That's sweet. So, ace-8 suited, if I remember, this is a half pot bet, kind of between 1/3 and 2/3. I'd say it's mostly a call, maybe check raise about 10% of the time. This is versus 2/3. It's basically always a call versus 2/3 and versus 1/3. Wait, no, sorry, check. He bets 1/3. It's about 25%, 40%. Okay, those situations with flush draws, so you don't count. About 20% of the time here. Roughly 20% of the time there. That's versus 1/3 versus 2/3. Never, so I think overall in the middle, 20%, 0%, 10% of times, probably good. First half pot. And as play versus 2/3 barrel, I think I was calling. And I think, yeah, we'll play. So say I call, no, versus 1/3, say I call. Jack of spades. Oh, jack of hearts. Check, they bet 2/3. Ace-8, it's always a call. Never raise. River is 4 of hearts. Let's see. I don't think we ever lead or do anything like the ace. So anyway, that's it. Well played. So this combo, the backdoor flush draw, gut shots all continue. With the backdoor flush draw, I think it check raises 2/3 of the time. If I remember, about 70% of the time, something like that. Looks good. I think my sizing could be a bit bigger, but this not too bad. about 2 BBs. And you know, it's not bad. 6.5 or 5.5. Check, bets 1.8 here. It's close to 2, so 5.5. This is actually damn near perfect size. Starting the hand with the both 40 bigs too. I like it. So let's see, Queen 10 off with the Queen of Spades. Yeah, about 2/3, 70% time. Alright. Call. I'm guessing it's a barrel, but I'm not sure. So I raise, call, 5 of diamonds. It's kind of different, the suits here. Let's look at what. It's mostly a barrel. If I had clubs here, it's more of a barrel. So pretend this is, in this situation it's a club. Queen of Spades, 10 of clubs. Still a barrel. Looks like sometimes betting half pot, sometimes betting 2/3, is that? Or is that 3/4? I bet half pot. I think it's too small. Wait, no, that's one of the options. Alright. I think I can value shove. This check this out. Seems weak. So bet half pot, they call, river is a 10. Brings it back to a flush draw, 10 diamonds. Yeah, so I should value shove, like, for sure, when I look back at what I'm doing, even versus someone tighter. I think they could have, you know, I don't know actually, wait, no. Could turn off pure call, pure check. Let me see. I'm tired. Alright, so he folds twice with 9-8, let's see if that's a good play. Yeah, standard. This is just a fold. Pretend it's suited, A2 suited is a check raise. Oh, I played this badly. This was like a year ago. Unless this guy barrels a ton on turn, I don't see why. Alright, odd stats aren't working. Anyways, fold pre-flop for sure. What the fuck was I thinking? Yeah, this is still a good call and just a fold. Alright, solid review. Under 30 minutes. Okay.